Hello YouTube. Oppo just launched the Find X8 and the Find X8 Pro, and I've got my hands on the Pro today. This time around, they're actually launching in the global market, which is great news for those of us who don't live in China. But things are a little bit different. Last year, we got the Find X7 and the Find X7 Ultra, but there's no Ultra model, at least not yet. So that puts us in a kind of strange position. Is the Find X8 Pro an upgrade or a downgrade? I don't think the answer is going to be that straightforward. So today I'm going to put the two phones head to head and see which one performs better. As always, there's timestamps, so skip around if you need to, and let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with a close-up look at the hardware of these two phones. It's plain to see that the two phones are related. They've got a very similar overall design. Both have got this centrally placed camera bump, but I do like that it's now symmetrical on the Find X8 Pro. All the cameras are evenly spaced with the Hasselblad logo in the middle. Find X7 Ultra is a little more unusual, with the Hasselblad logo off to the right and the large periscope zoom in the middle. Both look good, but that symmetrical design just makes a little more sense to me. However, overall, I do prefer the look of the Find X7 Ultra. I love this vegan leather finish you get on the back with the two-tone design. We've got like a white gloss upper and a navy lower portion. Honestly, it's just one of my favorite looking phones ever. That said, the Find X8 Pro also looks lovely. We've got this kind of marble effect pattern on the rear. Apparently these are all different, so every phone will have a slightly unique texture to the back, and it does feel lovely. It feels like a kind of like a kitchen countertop or a porcelain tile. The Find X8 Pro is a lot slimmer, especially the camera bump, which I don't know if that'll come across as well on camera, but yeah, you can see it there. It's a much slimmer design, although it's less curvy, so there's a sharper radius on the edges. This side panel is not quite flat. It does have a curve to it, which I'm sure you can see. The way the old phone's designed makes it feel like the side rails are slimmer, but in the hand they both feel about the same. The Find X8 Pro is a little bit lighter, but it's not a massive difference. Either way, you're going to have to be quite comfortable carrying a heavy phone to use either of these. Both have still got a notification slider on the side, so you can quickly switch between vibrate, silent, and noisy mode. One big thing that's new with the Find X8 Pro is the new camera control button, or quick launch button, I think Oppo are calling it. Basically, you've got a flush button here, a lot like the new button on the iPhone 16 series. And if you double tap that, even with the phone locked, it will open the camera app. Then you can press it to take a photo, or you can swipe to zoom in and out. I've found myself using it a lot to launch the camera app, but beyond that, I don't think it's the most easy way to zoom. I'd rather just use the buttons on the screen and, do that. Plus, in its current state, it's not as customizable as Apple's solution. So yeah, hopefully we'll see Oppo do a bit more of it in the future, but it's still quite neat. I quite like it. Not a game changer, but nice to have. When it comes to the cameras, both have a quad setup with dual periscope zooms. I'm not going to go through all the different sensor sizes, but the main thing you need to know is the sensor sizes are significantly smaller on the Find X8 Pro, and that's true of all the cameras except for the 6x telephoto, which has identical specs. The main sensor is only 1/1.4 inch, which is a big step down from the 1-inch sensor. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare. It is newer tech with some interesting tricks up its sleeve, but can it compete? We'll find out in a moment. And around the front, both have got a 32 megapixel punch hole selfie camera, but only the Find X7 Ultra has autofocus. It's fixed focus on the Find X8 Pro, so another step down there. Both phones come with a very basic case in the box. You get a solid matte TPU case with the Find X7 Ultra. Mine came in navy to match the navy finish of the phone. And the Find X8 Pro has a basic clear condom case, although it does have these little raised lips on the corner, so you get a bit of extra protection than you would with most standard cases in the event of a drop or whatever. I just don't like these clear cases very much. They get dirty really easy and they show up dust and stuff inside. I prefer these solid cases. Either way, it's nice to have something included, but you're probably going to want to pick up a nicer option, whichever phone you go for. When it comes to the displays, both have the same peak brightness, The biggest difference between the two is that the Find X7 Ultra has much more curved edges. They're not a crazy curve like on some phones, but the left and right sides are much more curved than the top. There's barely any curve to the top and the bottom. Whereas the Find X8 Pro has quad micro curves, which are probably quite hard to show on camera. You can just about see here. Basically, the entire screen that displays any content is flat and just the edges of the screen are curved. This is actually my preference. I've always been a big supporter of flat screens. I used to always say they were best, but I've come around on these simply because of gesture controls. If I open an app and then swipe back out of it, I'm swiping on that smooth edge, and that feels way better on these micro curves than it does on a flat display. Both are very nice screens. Haven't had any trouble with either of them, but I do like those micro curves on the new Find X8 Pro. When it comes to battery, the Find X8 Pro is a winner. It's got that new silicon carbon battery tech, and they've managed to squeeze 5,900 milliamp hours into such a tiny slim chassis, whereas the Find X7 Ultra has a more typical 5,000 milliamp hour cell. However, when it comes to charging, the Find X7 Ultra wins because it has 100 watt wired charging, and you only get 80 watt on the Oppo Find X8 Pro. They both do 50 watt wirelessly, so no difference there. And in terms of performance, you get the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 on the X7 Ultra and the Dimensity 9400 on the X8 Pro. Some people get scared off by Dimensity chips, but they shouldn't, because these performance figures are crazy. Yeah, so these are the results I got on 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. Kind of astonishing. One of the best scores I've ever seen from the X8 Pro. So if you like gaming, this is an absolute beast. Yeah, I know benchmarks aren't the full story, but still, that's impressive stuff. I should mention the X8 Pro is the global version, and I'm filming this well ahead of the embargo lift, so it is pre-release software, and we may see performance changes and we may see camera changes as updates roll out. So now let's get to what you're all here for. Let's see how the cameras perform right now. Okay, starting with the selfie cameras of these two phones. Both are recording at 4K 30. Both can do 4K 60 if you prefer. But the biggest difference between the two is that the X7 Ultra has autofocus while the X8 Pro does not. So if I get up close, I should look nice and sharp on the Ultra and probably not so sharp on the Pro. We're actually going to be going to the zoo in a bit, so get excited for that. But I thought I'd get this awkward bit where I have to talk to the camera out the way before we leave. So yeah, you won't have to look at my mug the whole time. Get to see some animals too. Of course, you can also use the rear cameras to film yourself, like I am right now. And I should have mentioned, we're using the built-in mics all the time. You'll see down on the screen where the speaker icon is. That's the phone you're listening to. It's a very mild day, not much wind, so shouldn't sound too bad. I'm imagining we'll see a shallower depth of field on the X7 Ultra. But you tell me, how does it look? And of course, you can also film yourself on the ultra wide. Get a lot more of your surroundings in when you do so. And that's how this looks. Both phones offer the ability to create a artificial bokeh effect, so it looks like you're filming on a mirrorless camera rather than a phone. We are on the selfie camera at the moment, and it does drop you down to 1080p. You can't do this at 4K, but the effect looks quite good. I think it might be one of the better ones, but I have to wait and see on a larger screen. How's it doing with my fingers? Looking pretty good to me. Okay, quick stabilization test now. We're starting on the ultra wide of both phones, and I'm walking along at a normal pace. Now here's with a jog. Main sensor now. Here's walking along, and here's with a jog. It's 3x telephoto of each. Here's standing still. Here's walking along, and here's with a jog. Now 6 times, which is probably going to do the worst. Here's standing still, here's walking along, and here's with a jog. Alright, we're at the zoo. I'm on the ultra wide of both cameras. Got this animal here, which looks a bit like an alpaca, but it's called something else. Zoologists can let me know in the comments what this is. Moving over to the main lens. Now the 2x, which is a digital crop. Now the 3x, which is our first telephoto. And the 6x, taken both to their maximum zoom, which is 18 times. I think the X8 looks a little bit cleaner on the phone screen, but you don't really know till you see it processed. Okay, quick macro to infinity focusing test using this Lego lion. Here's macro, here's infinity, here's macro, and here's infinity. Now let's try it on the 3x lens. Here's macro, here's infinity, back to macro, back to infinity, and finally the 6x, if I can get them lined up, there we go. There's macro, there's infinity, back to macro, back to infinity, and back to macro.
Good catch.
Okay, as you can see it got dark and we're back on the selfie cameras. We're at 4K 30 on both phones. Quite a well lit area here, but if I go past this illumination on the left, then it's a bit darker over here. So how does the stabilization look and how grainy are these? Okay, now we're on the main rear camera of each phone. These should look a lot clearer than the selfie cameras, and I'm expecting the Find X7 Ultra to have a much nicer look because it's got a much larger sensor. Should see a shallower depth of field as well, but I can't see the screen right now, so you tell me how they're looking. And if we switch to the ultra wide, should get a lot more in the shot, but the image is probably going to be a lot grainier. Again, I'm expecting the Find X7 Ultra to do better, but... Okay, quick test of the video stabilization. I'm just walking along normally on the ultra wide on both phones. Now I'll give it a quick jog. This is the main lens on each phone. Walking along normally. Now here's a quick jog. Switching to the 3x periscope. Here's what it looks like when you walk along normally. And here's jogging. Now 6x, which is definitely going to be the worst of all of them, is walking along normally. And here's a quick jog. Okay, now just a quick run through the zoom range, standing still handheld. This is the ultra wide. Now the 1x. 2x, which is obviously a digital crop. 3x, which is our first telephoto. 6x, which is our second telephoto. We'll take the Pro out to its maximum zoom, which is 18x. And the Ultra has the exact same zoom, although it's completely pointing in a different direction. Now back out to the main cameras and back out to the ultra wide. Okay, quick rack focusing test from macro to infinity using this pole thing. We're on the main lens of each. in focus. There's infinity. Back to macro. There's infinity. And back to macro. Is the Pro switching lenses? I'm not sure. Kind of looks like it is. No, I don't think it is. Let's do the same thing with the ultra wide. Both have autofocus on the ultra wide. Both look like they do pretty well. Now let's try the 3x. Now I definitely need to back up a bit. Looks like the Ultra's a bit quicker, but the Pro gets there as well. You alright? Security just came and told me off for filming that bollard, so I need to find something else to test the 6x on. Bear with me. Okay, this empty plant pot will do, I suppose. Here's the 6x telephoto. Here's the macro shot. Here's infinity. Back to macro. Back to infinity. Quite hard to do when it's so zoomed in, but they both look to be doing a good job. Okay, extreme low light test now. We're on a really dark street. Not the usual really dark street, but one that's equally dark, which is all we care about. We're on the selfie cameras and we're at 4K 30. Doesn't look like you can see a lot. Okay, now we're on the main cameras of each phone. I'm facing a street light. If I walk away, you'll get an idea of what it's like when I'm backlit. I'd imagine the Find X7 Ultra will do better because of the larger sensor, but you never know. So, how do they look? Okay, quick video stabilization test. Here I am walking along with the ultra wide, which looks very dark on both. Now moving over to the main lens, which looks a hell of a lot better. 2x digital crop on both. Now 3x telephoto. The X7 Ultra looks a lot brighter, but it looks pretty grainy and soft. Maybe that'll get cleaned up with processing, who knows. Finally 6x. And we've got basically the same specs on each one. But I will say the stabilization is looking a little better on the Ultra. But we'll see when the video is processed if that's the case. Okay, time to look at some photos. We're starting with this selfie because it's one of the first that I took. And unfortunately the Find X8 Pro is mirrored. Not a lot I can do about that. So try not to let it distract you. I'm sure you'll be fine. Off the bat, I can see we've got a bit of difference in color. I would say the Find X8 Pro has brought out the magenta tones in my face a little bit more. And I think it looks a little bit more natural. That is more like my actual skin tone. Whereas I look a little bit green shifted on the Find X7 Ultra. Not a big deal. You can always adjust them in your preferred image editor, but it is a difference. And when it comes to my jacket, I think the Find X7 Ultra has got the color a little bit more accurate, whereas there's a little bit of a grey, greeny vibe on the Find X8 Pro. Again, it's nothing major, but it is a difference nonetheless. Both are quite sharp, but the Find X7 Ultra is a little bit sharper, and that's not really a surprise because it has autofocus while the X8 Pro doesn't. Some weird sharpening artifacts on my mustache hairs on the X8 Pro. We're not seeing that on the X7 Ultra. The X7 Ultra looks lovely and natural. And also the background looks a little bit blurrier. Let's get the same background on each. So yeah, if you look at these leaves, they're much more out of focus, softer on the X7 Ultra, a little bit sharper on the X8 Pro. Again, I think that's because it has an autofocus lens. It's really obvious with these tree branches here. Look how soft they are on the X7 Ultra. So there's definitely a difference in the selfies. And for me, the X7 Ultra looks much better, which I'm not too surprised about. Now we've got two selfies with portrait mode turned on in the exact same location. Seeing the same thing with the skin tones. I look a little bit pale and a little bit greener in the X7 Ultra shot, slightly pinker, a bit warmer on the Oppo X8 Pro, which I do prefer. But will we see the same thing with sharpness? We probably will. Yeah, exactly the same. Still got those weird sharpening artifacts on my mustache hair on the X8 Pro. X7 Ultra just looks a little bit sharper, a little bit cleaner. In terms of the cutout, doesn't look like there's a lot of difference, and that's not too surprising with two Oppo phones. So yeah, actually very, very close, but I do think the X7 Ultra is a little bit better. Okay, moving on to a self-portrait using the rear camera, main rear camera of both phones. So we've got a 1-inch sensor versus a 1/1.4-inch sensor. I feel like I'm seeing the same thing with skin tones. I prefer them on the X8 Pro. I look a little more tan, I look a little bit more alive, I look very pale on the X7 Ultra, and that might be the difference between a global phone and a Chinese phone. Beyond that, you can also see the difference in depth of field, which I think is quite dramatic. Got a lovely soft background with the natural blur of the large sensor on the X7 Ultra. Everything's a little more in focus on the X8 Pro. And if we zoom in, we can see that both have nailed the focus. Both are extremely sharp. Both have great skin texture. It's actually quite close. For me, I'm a sucker for that blurry background. I like the way the X7 Ultra looks. I will admit that the skin tones are better on the X8 Pro. So it all depends on what you value in a photo. Do you want that soft, creamy background, or do you want better skin tones? Okay, now time for some photos from my quick trip to the zoo, which was really quick and was actually kind of a nightmare. I only had about half an hour to run around and take some photos before it closed. So we're working with what we got. Obviously, animals are a difficult subject. They don't stay still for more than a split second. And it was pretty dark, overcast day, so the lighting wasn't the best. So I'm just going to skip ahead now because I took a lot of photos at the zoo. They're all on the 6x lens, and I've analysed a few of them, and I'm basically seeing the same thing every time. I don't want to waste your time, so here's a summary. The Find X8 Pro adds a little extra sharpening than the X7 Ultra, which results in slightly sharper looking images. Both phones were prone to some motion blur because of the low light conditions, and there wasn't a clear theme. Both of them are blurry at times, and there are minor differences in colour. The X8 Pro does tend to favour warmer colours slightly. It's not always that consistent, so yeah, basically the 6x lens gives you similar quality, but the level of sharpening is slightly higher on the X8 Pro compared to the X7 Ultra. Now, I won't compare these two properly either, but I just wanted to point this out. A lot of the time when I selected portrait mode and I didn't have a human subject, like I've got this car here, the X8 Pro did apply the background blur, whereas the X7 Ultra didn't. It's not 100% of the time, but more often than not, the X8 would manage to deliver a blurry background while the X7 Ultra wouldn't. I'm sure that will change as the X7 Ultra gets newer software. Worth pointing out for now, the portrait mode is not as consistent. These are on almost the exact same settings. The X8 Pro is slightly more zoomed in, but other than that, same settings across the board. Okay, now we've got two close-up macro shots on the main lens of each camera. Pretty big difference in the color. The pink is a lot more vibrant on the X8 Pro. It looks a little bit darker on the X7 Ultra. It looks like the X8 Pro has nailed the focus a bit better as well. It's definitely sharper on these leaves here. It just looks sharper across the board, really. So yeah, quite similar photos, but I think the X8 Pro has done a better job here. Okay, so these two photos are on different lenses. The X8 Pro is on the 6x lens, while the X7 Ultra is on the 3x lens. And the reason for that is the 3x on the X8 Pro just can't focus very close, so I couldn't get a similar shot. It will just switch to the macro lens, which is the ultra wide, and that's a shame because macros with the 3x on the X7 Ultra look fantastic, as you can see here. Probably the best of all the lenses I tried. It looks better than the main sensor shot did, and it looks better than the 6x shot, which I will switch to now. So these are both on the 6x, and as you can see, the X8 Pro has done a better job with focus from the looks of things. Really sharp, the water on this leaf here and this spiderweb. So yeah, on the 6x, I would say the X8 Pro has done a better job, but it's a real shame that you can't focus close with the 3x, because I do think this 3x shot from the X7 Ultra looks fantastic, and yeah, that's not an option with the X8 Pro. Now a quick run through all the focal lengths with the local church, which you've seen many times. Minor differences in colour, slightly more contrast on the X7 Ultra, slightly better dynamic range on the X8 Pro I think. I can see a tiny bit more detail in the clouds. I can see detail on both of them. If we zoom in, the text is definitely sharper on the new X8 Pro, and everything's just a little bit sharper on the X8 Pro. It's likely mostly down to image processing, but but I do think it makes for a better photo. So I'll give that one to the X8. Now on the main lens, very similar shots, slightly brighter on the X8. Looks like there's added sharpening as well, just looking at the grass. And if we zoom in, both have got good detail. I'm doxing the Reverend of the Rappy Church. Slight added sharpness on the X8, but it's not major. They're very, very similar. I think at a glance, they're almost identical. It's down to personal preference. Moving on to the 3X lenses, can't see a major difference right off the bat. Minor differences in image processing. The clock is a little bit brighter on the X8 Pro. Both are very sharp. Both have a slightly processed look to them, but both still look good. The X8 Pro is a little bit sharper, and I wouldn't say it does look slightly more unnatural. Either way, really, really close. Just seeing the same thing, as I'm probably going to have to say for every photo. There's slightly more sharpening on the X8 Pro. Now the 6X lens, weirdly we got a little bit of blur on the X8 Pro this time. I just zoomed out to make sure that was the X8 Pro. Yeah. This time the X7 Ultra is sharper, maybe slightly noisier. Is there any difference in the exposure time? Not a massive one. Yeah, both are decent, but the X7 Ultra did better this time. This one's at about 20 times zoom. So at a glance, I would say that the brickwork looks more natural on the X7 Ultra, which would make me think that more sharpening has been applied to the X8 Pro as we've normally seen. But when you zoom in on the clock, it's actually sharper on the X7 Ultra, and the X8 Pro kind of has a bit of blooming and halation. Definitely slightly less sharp on the X8 Pro. Personally, I think X7 Ultra nails that one. Now for this, I just want to show what you get at maximum zoom. It's the same on both, 120 times zoom, which is pretty crazy. And we're going to be zooming in on this tower in the distance. I just wanted to show where I was taking the photo from. This is on the main lens of each. We're not going to analyze this. I'm just going to show you the zoomed in shot. So let's look at that. So yeah, this is about 120 times zoom. And obviously, while neither are impressive, there is a generational change. When you get past about 60x zoom, Oppo starts to apply some AI algorithms to the shot. It reduces noise and gives you sharper lines, but it does make things up. This might not be the best example because these two shots look quite similar, but you can see that the image is cleaner on the X8 Pro, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily more accurate. Either way, if you go to maximum zoom, this is the kind of image you can expect. Okay, so I think this is quite a good example of the AI zoom feature. Here we are on the ultra wide, now the main, 3x, 6x, 20x, 50x, I believe, and at maximum zoom. And did you see what happened there? If you look at this brickwork here, when I hit maximum zoom, it's just made up all these lines which weren't there. It's just the AI guessing the details that might be there. And it does look cool, it looks impressive, but it's not reality and it's not really a photo. I've kind of got mixed feelings about that. I do think it's impressive because remember we're zooming from this far away. That's a really long zoom, and you get a very clean image from it. But yeah, I've got mixed feelings. It's not a real photo, and this isn't currently available on the X7 Ultra. It might come via firmware update. It might by the time this video goes out. Alright, time for low light photography at a very familiar location. These photos are both taken on the ultra wides. You can see that the X8 Pro has a slightly brighter exposure overall, and the X7 Ultra shot is a little more subtle, maybe a little bit more realistic. Let's zoom in and see what we can see. The X8 Pro is definitely sharper, and I would say it's captured more details in this text up here on the red neon signs. That's completely blown out on the X7 Ultra, and you can just about see the text below the Slim Chickens logo, whereas that area is completely blown out on the X7 Ultra. Same with this sign here, but it's not exactly clean. There are definite artifacts. There are slight sharpening artifacts all over the image, really. But overall, I would say it's done a better job than the X7 Ultra. Now switching to the main lenses, which should do a better job because they got much larger sensors, especially in the case of the X7 Ultra. Seeing the same thing again, definitely a little bit of a brighter exposure on the X8 Pro, whereas I think the X7 Ultra looks a little more realistic. It's kind of the contrast is less dramatic on that. If we zoom in, this guy's definitely sharper on the X8 Pro. That's not from the lens, that's the image processing that's done that. There are differences in the way that the red neon signs have been rendered. They look redder on the X7 Ultra, which is more realistic. They've gone a bit orangey on the X8 Pro. And this text is much more legible underneath the Slim Chickens logo. It's, there's artifacts that have kind of made a mess on the X8 Pro. Quite similar, but I do think the X7 Ultra edges it out. I think that's a slightly better photo, at least in my eyes. Now the 3x lens, we've switched. The X7 Ultra is a bit of a brighter exposure. It does have a larger sensor, if that matters. And maybe it doesn't, because there's less noise. There's a lot less noise in the X8 Pro shot, and the text looks much cleaner. Yeah, you can see noise in this planter here, noise in all the shadow areas. I prefer the way the neon sign looks on the X8 Pro as well. Everything's just a little bit sharper. So yeah, quite surprised, but the X8 Pro has done a better job there. Now finally the 6x lens, which has very similar specifications and should deliver similar results. Not a lot in the exposure, that's looking quite similar, and they both look pretty sharp. Let's zoom in. X7 Ultra looks a tiny bit sharper on the text. There's a little more, maybe slightly more blooming on the X8 Pro, but there's not a lot in it. These are really, really similar. I mean, either way, they're both pretty good. Now 2 more 3x shots of this delivery rider. Let's see what we can see here. X8 Pro, a little bit darker. X7 Ultra has definitely brightened things up a bit. The details are sharper on the X8 Pro. Again, that's likely image processing. But does that matter? If the results work, they work. Yeah, I prefer the exposure of the X7 Ultra, but the X8 Pro is definitely a little bit sharper. It's too close to call, really. Now just a shot of the front of this churro van, and the X7 Ultra has a kind of dreamier, more glowy look, and I think that's the larger sensor doing its thing, because Slim Chickens in the background is looking pretty soft, whereas everything is sharp on the smaller sensor of the X8 Pro. Both pretty clean, I think. Not a lot of noise. Similar color rendition. It's mainly just the depth of field. I mean, really, that's a preference thing. I'm a sucker for a shallow depth of field, but you might not be. And smaller sensors do give you sharper images. Like, look how sharp the bonnet of this van is on here. It's a little bit softer on the X7 Ultra because it's only got thin focal plane with that large sensor. Now a couple of low light selfies. Again, sorry that the X8 Pro is mirrored, but what can you do? Pretty big difference in exposure. My face is a lot brighter on the X8 Pro. X7 Ultra's got a more balanced exposure, I would say. The X7 Ultra is a lot sharper. You can see that on my stubble. It almost disappears on the X8 Pro. Also looks like there might be a little bit of motion blur on my cheek, whereas you can see the texture of my skin a little more on the X7 Ultra. The brim of my cap is a little bit sharper as well. Not great on either of them, but a little bit sharper on the X7 Ultra. X7 takes that one for sure. Now same shot, same location, but with portrait mode turned on. Unfortunately, I have got the settings a little messed up. The blur level is stronger on the X7 Ultra than it is on the X8 Pro. But never mind, we should still be able to get some detail. We should be able to look at the cutout and see what we think. To be honest, the blur effects are basically going to be the same. These are 2 Oppo phones. They're running very similar algorithms. If the X8 Pro was set to f2 like the X7 Ultra is, they would look basically the same, I think. It's mainly the image that we need to be concerned about. This time the X8 Pro has done a better job with the sharpness. Although the sharpening looks very unnatural. It almost looks like there's static and pixelation in my eyebrows, which is very odd. And you can see that a little bit on the X7 Ultra, but it looks a lot more natural. But I also look softer, and I'm seeing a lot more noise too. I would say the X8 Pro has done a slightly better job, but I really don't like how my eyebrows look. Very odd. Very, very odd. Now these 2 photos were taken on the main rear camera. No portrait mode. This is the natural background blur that you get from the larger rear sensors. Slight difference in the color of my face. Hard to say which one's done a better job. They both look decent to me. Slightly warmer on the X8 Pro, as is often the case. And a lot more background blur from the 1-inch sensor of the X7 Ultra, which as I've said, I'm a big fan of. And if we look at the details, I would say there's not a lot in it. Both very sharp. Yeah, both of these look fantastic. I don't have a massive preference either way, but I do like the softness that you get from that larger sensor, so I'd give this one to the X7 Ultra. Okay, these 2 are on the 3x lens. Pretty similar at a glance. Looks like we've got some motion blur on the sign on the X8 Pro. But we do have some noise, maybe some slight subtle artifacts on the X7 Ultra. These lamps have been rendered pretty similarly. Everything looks a little tiny bit cleaner on the X7 Ultra, but it's not major. This sign definitely looks a little bit sharper on the X8 Pro, but it doesn't look any more detailed. It just looks like there's slightly more sharpening on it. Yeah, not a lot in this. Very, very similar shots. Now another shot of the pub, this time on the main lens. Getting pretty similar looking images at a glance. I would say the X8 Pro definitely looks a little bit sharper. As always, that will be sharpening rather than actual sharpness, I believe. Both look to have about the same amount of detail, but the text is slightly more legible on the X7 Ultra, at least on this sign in the foreground. I would say the same about these. The sharpening has kind of muddied the text a little bit on these signs. Pretty hard to read either way. This one's extremely close again, but I do think the more subtle approach of the X7 Ultra with less sharpening is better for detail retention. Whether it looks better as a whole, I think that's up for debate. These are really close. Now these two shots are on the 6x lens. This time the X7 Ultra looks sharper, a lot sharper. That's interesting. Since these both have really similar specs, I was expecting them to look quite similar, but the X7 Ultra is way better on this one. What about these signs up here? Sharper on the X7, a little bit of noise, tiny bit of artifacting. But yeah, overall the X7 Ultra has done better on this one. Now these are 3x shots from the same location. And at a glance, I have a feeling the X7 Ultra is going to be sharper yet again. Softness and motion blur on the X8 Pro. Very sharp, very legible text on the X7 Ultra. X7 Ultra's just smashed this one. Yeah, the larger sensors helped out. It took a 1/20th of a second exposure, whereas the X8 Pro needed a whole 1/7 of a second, which is very slow. And that's why we got motion blur in the shot. Okay, these two shots were taken on the main lens. Really similar at a glance. Slightly bigger lens flare on the X8 Pro in this area and on this street light too. But other than that, they're looking really similar. Slightly sharper and better highlight retention on the X7 Ultra, but it's marginal. It's very marginal. Yeah, these are way too close. They're basically the same. Now just a run through of all the lenses on the really dark street. If there was ever a time for larger sensors to shine, it would be this one. So let's see what happens. These are the ultra wides, which are gonna fare the worst on each. Both took a pretty long exposure to get this shot. And we've ended up with a fairly similar image. Definitely warmer tones on the X8 Pro, darker sky on the X7 Ultra, maybe slightly more noise on the X8 Pro. Let's zoom in. Both have got a lot of noise in the sky, but I think there's more like blocking in the X8 Pro shot. Very AI enhanced. This Volkswagen ID buzz is not looking great. It looks like it's melting in this shot, and it's not doing much better in the X7 Ultra. Honestly, these are neck and neck. Neither are particularly good. No, I wouldn't say we have a clear winner. I would say they're both equally not performing very well. Now onto the main lens, where we may see a bigger difference. Again, both had to take quite a long exposure because the scene was so dark. And again, the X8 Pro is slightly warmer. The X7 Ultra is marginally cleaner on this number plate here. You can actually see the circle on the EU symbol on the number plate, whereas that's not visible on the X8 Pro. And this 38 has clearly been distorted. It's created a straight line underneath, whereas clearly two words are written there. You can't read them, but you can see that there's two words written there. So there's some AI shenanigans going on with the X8 Pro. I do think the ID buzz looks a little bit distorted. I mean, to be fair, the X7 Ultra is not doing much better. There's really not a lot in it, but I do think the X7 Ultra is a little bit better. Now this is 2x, which is a digital crop using the same sensor. Is it going to look any better? Not much of a difference at a glance. Slightly warmer on the X8 Pro, maybe slightly brighter, but not a lot in it. Both are capturing about the same level of detail, I would say, but the X8 Pro is definitely much noisier. A lot of grain in the shadows. Yeah, both of these look pretty bad, but there's slightly less noise on the X7 Ultra, so I'd give it to the X7 Ultra. Moving on to the 3x lens. Got a bit of a green tint going on the X8 Pro, and it might be slightly brighter. Definitely noisier and more artifacts on the X8 Pro. This wall is much sharper on the X7 Ultra. Again, obviously neither are looking great, but these are very challenging conditions to take a photo in. But yeah, there's no contest. The text on the number plate is more legible. There's less artifacts on the bonnet. The brickwork is much sharper. X7 Ultra did a better job on the 3x telephoto. Now finally, a shot on the 6x of each. Very long exposure time for both. Looks like the X8 Pro is a lot noisier, and I feel like it almost looks like this van is blending in with the background a little bit. But the X7 Ultra looks a little soft. So let's take a closer look. Definitely soft. Okay. I think what we've got here is essentially the same image. The X8 Pro has the sharpening slider slid up a bit, and as a result, you get sharper lines, but you also get a lot more noise and artifact. So which one do you like better? They both look pretty trash. Okay, looks like it's about to rain, so I'm going to try and bang out this outro real quick. As expected, I think it's quite hard to call a clear winner between these two cameras. In video, they produce very similar results. The microphones sound identical. The stabilization is similar, but I think the X7 pulls slightly ahead at the moment. We might see improvements to the X8 Pro as new firmware is released. I think the main difference is with the sensor size. You get that shallower depth of field with the X7 Ultra's main and 3x lenses, which I think looks really good. And obviously there's autofocus on the selfie camera. But in low light, I don't think it makes a massive difference to the image quality. And that's true in both photo and video. The photos looked really similar, just a tiny bit more sharpening to the X8 Pro photos, but it does look good in a lot of situations. So overall, I would say the X7 Ultra I prefer for photos and videos, but it is a very slight difference. And there's plenty of reasons to get the X8 Pro over the X7 Ultra. First of all, it's launched globally, so it's much easier to get your hands on in different parts of the world. It's also got a bigger battery, it's much faster, and it's going to work with the Blackmagic camera app at some point soon. Don't know if the X7 Ultra will get support for that or not. We'll have to wait and see. So there's a chance the X8 Pro will have the leg up for video production. But yeah, that's about it for this one. I hope you found it useful. If you did, hit subscribe because there's always more phones on the way. So stay tuned and I'll catch you in the next one. Toodles.